Right, good afternoon. Oh, it is afternoon, 12 o'clock. Thank you for coming to Back to Basics. So I did some of these sessions last year. They were super popular, so I was asked back, which is really nice. And this is for 30 minutes. This session is aimed for people who perhaps have just started out booking events or want a bit of a refresher on some of the terminology that we use, how to deal with getting the accurate quotes from hotels and venues as well. So there's a lot of information here about explaining DDRs and 24-hour rates and going into a bit of detail about that. So just to make sure, this is the Back to Basics session, and if you are here, if you thought you were at another session, now's the time to go, and that's absolutely fine. Ladies, did you want to put the headphones on, or? And then you'll hear me. Brilliant. Can you hear me okay? Excellent, fabulous. Feel free to take any snapshots. Last year, this was probably the one that had the most pictures taken because there's quite a lot of example slides, and I do go quite quickly through it as well. So I'm Lyndsey Taylor, Park Lane Events. I have my own venue finding company. I have been going, it'll be 10 years next year, and I used to work on the hotel side. I have opened hotels as well, and so I'm used to doing the pre-opening right through to taking bookings. I've worked in the conference and events departments, I've worked in sales, I've done representation for other hotels as well. So I'm quite used to the whole process, but actually listening to what people need and also understanding what does the hotel need from the corporate buyer as well. So it's trying to keep that connection nice and tight. So I just want to say about the sponsors and the supportive team behind this as well. So we've got ASM Global, they're the sponsors of this, of the PA Lounge, and they have a little stand over there, and they have a bigger stand in the exhibition stand, in the exhibition hall. Also want to point out our AV partner, Lighthouse Events, our lovely young man in the corner there. So yeah, any problems with your headphones, go and see him. And so moving on with ASM Global, they actually have, I just wanted to point out because they are the sponsors, they have the Olympia London that they're doing a massive redevelopment with, 1.3 million redevelopment there, and they've got a couple other properties that they manage as well, other areas of the country. So that's just a quick nod there. So back to basics. I don't know if you can see any of that, but it's basically just going over what I've just said with some of the subjects that we're going to cover today. So also talking about minimum spends, also asking hotels if they include VAT or exclude VAT with their quotes. They don't all state that, which you wouldn't believe happens, but it does. And also, is your budget including VAT or plus VAT? Because it kind of can go both ways. If the corporate buyer doesn't know that from their internal budgets, and then the hotel haven't, that's all right, and if the hotels haven't mentioned it on their quote, you can be talking about quite two different rates there. So it's quite important to find that information out as well. Also talking about half days, full days, overnights, what's included on all of those, and how to get the best for your money. So DDR explained, we'll go through the 8-hour and DDR, we'll go through what's included, which again, this is where people last year were taking a lot of pictures. If it's easier to sit over this side as well, if you can see the screen easier, feel free to do that. So the things that you need to make sure when you're getting your DDR quote, DDR and 8-hour is exactly the same thing. But obviously 8-hour, the hotel might say, oh, it's from this time to that time. So make sure you know what those times are if they have a set time. So you should have 3 teas and coffee servings in that. Some do not. Some still put 2 for some reason. Nodding your head, yeah. And it's really frustrating because you put a quote out you put an inquiry out to say 5 or 10 venues, and you expect them all to come back with the same thing so you can compare like for like. So that's just something to have on your sort of checklist as well. Hopefully 3 tea and coffee breaks, and also what pastries or biscuits do they come with, because that does change a lot as well. Are you happy if it's just basic cookies or biscuits, or do you want the full-on pastries? And sometimes they just have an upgraded an upgraded thing to offer you then as well. So it just means it's different prices for that. 2-course lunch. The lunch one is the biggest thing that changes at every venue. I always say to them, can you please send me an example menu that goes with your DDR rate? A lot of people don't ask that. Some people just go, oh, it's chef's choice. That's great. What is your chef? What did you do yesterday? Take a picture or just send. It's going to be written down somewhere because someone's had to deliver that. So they will have it, but it's asking these extra questions that just make sure you've got all the information that you have to make to get the best for your money, which is what we're all trying to do. So with the lunches, some might quote, yep, you get your 2-course lunch or just lunch. Well, is that a 2-course lunch? Is it a hot fork buffet lunch? Is it a finger buffet lunch? Is it a lunch in the room? Is it a lunch outside of the room? So there's all these extra questions to bear in mind. Don't ever assume that what you booked last time is also what it's going to be this time. Different chefs then come up with different ideas. That's not necessarily communicated. Projector screen and flip chart, that should be included, obviously, but you're shaking this, is it? Because it's not always. It should be included in your day delegate rate. And also asking what the quality is of that, and I'll come on to that in a second. Wi-Fi, you think that's blooming obvious. Wi-Fi should be included with that, but how good is that Wi-Fi? Are there patches, particularly where your conference room is, where it's not very good? So that's another element. Delegate stationery, so that's your pads and pencils. Again, because of sustainability, some properties don't do that, but they might have it on a table in the room, all piled up, so that then people can just help themselves to that as they come in, and then there's not so much wasted. And again, depending on your sustainability policies, it might be that you ask for that not to be included. So there's more elements that the hotels and venues are having to think about as well. Bottled water or jugs of water, are they glass bottles? Again, looking at sustainability, they should all be without plastic bottles now. They're not all necessarily. But again, is water included, and making sure even if it's tap water, there's enough jugs of water and that they're replenished as well. Doesn't always happen. Car parking, big controversial one, especially with the city centre properties, because obviously you're going to get charged with the city centre ones. How much is that? Do they have a discount at that hotel? With that, I ask, do you own that car park? Before I ask for a price, do you own that price? Or if they've just automatically given the price. If they own it, there's a bit of negotiation there, and you'll be able to get that a bit cheaper. If they're like, no, it's an NCP, it's just that we recommend that one as our local one, less chance. Some of them do have agreements with that NCP that they can give you that at a discount. I was talking to somebody yesterday, they get a 50% discount with their NCP car park. That's massive. That was in Birmingham, that was the Grand Hotel at Birmingham. So I think it's about £15. So normally it's £30 for people overnight to stay. So again, that's quite a lot of money that adds up. That's kind of an ancillary thing that you don't always think about when you're getting those initial meeting room quotes. Obviously, if it's free car parking, brilliant, we're winning. So therefore, then there's the argument, are you better off with a room hire and lunch and teas and coffees all put separately rather than a day delegate rate? So does anybody ever come up, you just put your hand up, or does anybody ever come up to that? Do you ever think about asking for a separate lunch? So that's more perhaps if it's an afternoon meeting or not the whole full day actually, or if you've got for some reason fluctuating numbers, perhaps different people coming in the morning than the afternoon, not everybody needs lunch. It's like, actually, I want this broken down. And sometimes it's broken down because you have to give that to other people to show this is the breakdown of the event and this is why it's costing X and Y for it to be signed off. So again, with the room hire, again, so I've got little tips on each of these. Check access time. So I always ask, I have like a table that I've got a slide of, so you can take a picture of it in a second, of all of these questions to make sure I'm getting all of that information in one email so that we're as efficient as possible and not going backwards and forwards with all these questions afterwards. Hotels and venues don't all fill it in. Most of them do, and sometimes I will be a little bit arsey. I will be honest, and go, this is great because they've sent me a proposal with half the information, and I've said this is great. If you can please fill in the table below. I can't send it to my client like this. Within 10 minutes they filled it in, and I'm like, great, thanks. Now I can distinguish this venue against another venue. So check the access time before the 9 to 5. What time do you say it is a 9 to 5 meeting? What time can you get in? And what time do you want to get in? It might be that you want to get in at 8 or 7 or even earlier depending on the setup anyway. So most of them are flexible, some are not. So again, it is just asking that question. And also, what if you run over? They might have an event in that room afterwards, so there might be a hard deadline for you all to be out of 5, or so you need to perhaps pass forward that internally, or what if it goes on to 6? Some are flexible again, some are not, but it just depends on what they've got in the evening. So I mentioned the tea and coffee breaks, checking biscuits, cookings, pastries, cakes, especially as there are 3, so that's your welcome, your mid-morning and your afternoon. So again, because that can vary so much, some people this is really important. I used to have a client and every afternoon break they had to have fruit with it. So there was a charge often with a lot of hotels. What's that charge? Others were like, no, that's fine. We run a welcome, we love that client, so we'll include it, and that's a negotiation that you can have there. Lunch packages, so I mentioned it, check. Is it sandwiches, finger or fork buffet, hot fork buffet, or is it even in the restaurant? A lot of my clients like to go away from the meeting room. They want to go to their lunch in the restaurant and have their 2-course there. It's a hot fork buffet. That way everyone can just help themselves to what they want. It's usually chef's choice, and that's why I ask for an example menu beforehand, so that then they have a rough idea of the type of food that they can deliver. AV, sound and visuals, check what's included and the quality. So, with AV normally, as I said earlier, you get your projector and your screen to either a screen like a TV screen or a pull-up screen. And again, it's what does that look like? Can they send you a visual of that? Because there is such a huge amount of variety now with all the hotels. And the last thing you want to do is turn up to a pokey little screen and people at the back can't see it. Or should you have hired something in, then that's an additional cost, of course, and that's all part of the budget. But there's nothing worse than turning up and the mic's not very good and the AV's not connecting properly, and then they don't have somebody to help at that moment in time. So a lot of that research and time beforehand can just help everything on the day much easier. And then invoicing, I think this gets left behind a lot. You're like, oh, I've got the event planned, right, lovely, now we'll just sign off whatever afterwards. That's just as important as that first research in the first place. You're nodding at the back there. Check your numbers on the day. Obviously, you've got people that are signing in your registration, and you have that anyway. So just making sure, does this invoice line up to all the people that we said or that we contracted for? So again, the difference between what you contracted for. So I always recommend that people contract on minimum numbers. So again, and you'll see in my little chart in a minute, whenever I put an inquiry over to a hotel or venue, I would say, what's the minimum that we can contract this on? And what is the maximum that room can take? And that's where you can play with those numbers, from the smallest that you're willing to pay for, and the maximum that room can take, so that you've got that room to play around with. So that's afterwards, taking that time to make sure that that's accurate, and we all only ever want to pay for what we've had at the end of the day. So then with the 24-hour rate, all of the day delegate rates inclusions that I mentioned, obviously I won't go through those again, but then the 24-hour rate does include accommodation either the day prior of the event or the night of the event, so it depends when you want to start it. So the 24-hour rate can start at any time. So it can be at 6 p.m. when everybody's arriving and rolls over to 6 p.m. the next day. Or if everyone's arriving at 9 a.m., well, you start your 24-hour rate then and they stay the night of. And it can be a bit of both. And that's when it can start getting a little bit complicated of who's coming the night before, who's the night of, do I need a bed and breakfast rate on top of that as well? What does that look like? Or is it a 2 or 3 day event? And then I've got to times this by 2 or 3 times. And that's where you want to perhaps the hotel to help with that as well, because they've got their systems, they put it all through, it churns it all out anyway, so you get that first look at what that might look like. One thing I always say as well, when you're putting that inquiry through for a 24-hour rate and you've got accommodation requirements, I always write double for sole occupancy. So there shouldn't be any single beds. So some hotels do still have single beds, and some people might put them in twins, and then you've got the 2 single beds there, of course, if they are the normal little single beds. So I always put double for sole. So that just means a double room, but for one person. So I want the rate for one person, but I want them in a double room. Sounds quite obvious, but it's It's amazing what comes back from hotels sometimes with these. Also, some of them will mention the room categories. I talk about run of house as well. So that's when, say you've got 80 bedrooms that you need, the hotel might only have 100. So you're obviously going to have your standards, your execs, perhaps some suites in there. So you're like, well, I don't want you to give me a price for standard, and then another price for executives, and then another price for junior suites. What's your run of house rate? That means one rate for all of those, and then it just means that they've given you, that one rate that you know that you're paying for, and then it's up to you with your rooming list who you're upgrading within that. So run of house one is one that I definitely recommend that you use. So writing double for sole occupancy run of house is quite a handy tip. Also makes you look like you really know what you're talking about as well. Then of course you've got your evening meal, which is included as well. Sometimes a 24-hour rate will include just 2 courses, so just watch out for those ones, because you're like, oh, this one's cheaper than that one. If you want just 2 courses, that's fine. And again, that's another place where you are paying for a 3-course evening meal within that 24-hour rate. If you're like, we don't need that, we just want a main course and a pudding. So you can negotiate that and perhaps get a bit of money off. Not all of them, but it's just another tip there that some will do that. But then, say you've got a group of 30 people, where are they going to have that dinner? Are they all going to be on long tables in the restaurant? That might be fine. Do you want a private space? Because actually they want to continue that discussion from the day's events, or just because they might be a bit noisy, or like, actually, for the sake of other people, I want us in a private room. Now, some hotels, not all, some you can get that complimentary, that room hire. Something that I try to negotiate as well. Sometimes you do need just to pay that because it's the only function space they've got. They could be taking another event in that space anyway because they're a busy enough hotel. But sometimes it does suit the hotel because they're like, we'd rather put you in that room. Our staff we've got different staff to just concentrate on you. You're getting the service that you need. So that suits us. So again, it's that conversation. A lot of this does take a little bit of time, so hopefully just by putting some of these questions in when you're putting that inquiry through, they can then tell you all that firsthand. And then breakfast. Check if it's full English breakfast. You assume, of course, it's full English breakfast within a 24-hour rate. Sometimes it is continental. So if they haven't written in their inclusions full English, double check, because again, that's why the rate might be a bit cheaper. And you're like, oh, I can't give everyone a continental. We assumed it would be a full English because 90% of quotes are with English breakfast. So that one's there. Let's get that picture taken. So then we're on to room layouts. I'm going to assume not everybody is comfortable with room layouts and what they all mean. So last week I even had somebody that asked me, you've got 2 layouts on here, you've got cabaret and dinner, one smaller than the other. And it's like, yeah, because they are 2 entirely different layouts depending on what you want to do. So cabaret style, and this is the one where a lot of people think cabaret is actually all the way around. It is, as you can see, just over halfway round. As you can see, I've put up there 5 or 6 per table. You can get more, so this depends on the table sizes at the venue. So if they've got 10-foot tables, 12-foot tables, you can obviously put more people on. So some cabaret might be 7 or 8 people on a table because they're using 12-foot tables. What it means mainly is that nobody should have to turn their chair around to be able to see the screen. The idea is that everyone can sit there and see the screen. Might have to turn some of these ones slightly, but you don't have them here where you'd have to turn it all the way around. Because depending on the agenda, if you're going backwards and forth of workshop, talking with each other, or going back at the screen, you don't want people faffing about there. Some companies, got one company, they don't mind. They're like, no, we can have 10 to a table, that's fine. I'm like, that's great, that's not cabaret, I'll ask for it dinner style for your meeting. And then we can get more people in, and they're absolutely fine with that. Next one, so yeah, going on to rounds or banqueting style. So I've been asked, what does banqueting style mean? Well, it just means it's all on rounds, it's for dinner. Again, 8 to 10 to 12 per table, and that again depends on the size of the tables that the venue has. So 10 foots or 12 foots there. And then we've got theatre style or auditorium, that's all quite self-explanatory, I appreciate. And then boardrooms or one long table. So PD, private dining. Some people are like, oh, we can do 23 PD. It's like, well, what does that mean? Private dining. So again, just one long table basically there. U-shape or horseshoe. So somebody said, what's horseshoe? Well, it just means U-shape, and there's an example of that. And it should be that the chairs are all the way around the outside here. it has been known that some venues, to get more capacity, will put chairs on the inside. Obviously, that's a no-no to the corporate market. So that's that one there. Then polo square or hollow square rectangles. I've got an alarm going off. Polo square or hollow square, or as that one is, a rectangle. So that's another one some people ask for. Again, these are less required. It's more sort of cabaret these days anyway. And then we've got classroom style. Classroom and cabaret can be quite similar in their numbers. So often if I've only been given one, like on a capacity chart, you don't have all of these on a capacity chart at a venue necessarily. So when you're trying to work it out yourself, I always think, well, classroom's X amount, maximum capacity, so cabaret's probably going to be quite similar there. And then you've got just an example of where you're doing a bit of everything. Exhibition area, theatre area, networking area. So again, it's writing all those down and saying to them, if this whole space, what's the maximum if I've got an exhibition in here? What's the maximum for theatre here, cabaret here? So it's just having that accuracy. So here's an example of an inquiry that I would put through and how I would word it and all the information I am asking from them. So do take a picture. So the obvious stuff, the dates. You've then got delegate numbers, very specific with the dates. Always put the day as well as the date. It's amazing how all of us put a day and they go, you know that's a Sunday. Like, no, I didn't realize that. I was looking at this year's dates, not next year's dates, or using this year's dates. So always check the diary, physically write it down, and then you've got that accuracy. Things like this looks a bit wordy. 8 for dinner as individuals at leisure in restaurant does not need to be on the contract. This is paid for by the delegates themselves and charged as taken. So my client wanted to know, I've got 8 people coming the night before, I don't want it to go on the bill, but I want to know that they can do it and where can they do it. So they were people that would just come at leisure in their own time, obviously just eat generally in the restaurant, and that was how that was, their delegates have their own budget for that, but it was just to make sure that they're aware that that's something that needs to be done. Obviously 8 accommodation, double for sole use, and then the meeting was 30 cabaret, full day meeting. I always put full day, just to make sure they're not confused with anything else that it might be. Private dinner, so this particular client does want that dinner in their own space rather than in the restaurant. 30 accommodation again, so then we've got a bit of repetition there. And I always put depart. I always put depart at the end. It's clear, that's when it's going to finish. The amount of times you will get an email going, do they need dinner that night? Do they need any more rooms that night? Emails that we can avoid, because you're like, I knew I didn't need that, but now I've got to answer them. So I always put depart at the end, and like say it's the morning, breakfast, depart. So it's very clear. Syndicates, always, if you can find out if you need syndicates before, it's better to put them on at this stage and take them off than halfway through go, oh, we need a syndicate, and all of a sudden you can't hold it at that property and you've gone through all of this and you're like, oh, this hotel is now not an option because they haven't got enough syndicate rooms. So the lunch bit I mentioned, always put your budget. So even if you don't know it completely, you'll have a rough idea. You've perhaps done it the year before, what was the total cost there. Use whatever you can internally to put that budget forward so that you are getting the most accurate from the hotels. Used to be that people didn't want to put their budget because it's like, oh, well, what if they can do it cheaper than that? But what happens is you end up wasting time where they just put a rate out, and actually you might have had a budget that was £20 a head cheaper. They could have done that if they were like, this fits in really well, but because they haven't given us a budget, I'm going to put our regular rate. But actually if you put the budget, they're like, we really want this. If we can match their budget, then again that saves that backwards and forwards as well. So I also don't send any inquiries for my clients to a venue unless there is a budget in there, because I have that trust with the venues that I have already done this due diligence for them as well. So at least that way I know I'm only approaching the right hotels that I think are going to fit into that budget as well. So, and again, I've put, this is the budget including VAT for per 24 hour. Free parking, so that's like, yeah, they're expecting free parking. This would have been to a Country Manor property. Yes, it was, because this particular client, their senior management team all have electric cars. So that's a priority now with their venues. So I do ask for that. This timeline is to protect you as well. So when do you need that response required by, and when is the decision going to be made by as well? Because you, say we put this out today, you've got like a week until your next meeting. It's like, well, you want that information in the next 2 days, so I want it by Friday, please. That gives you that time to put it all together, to present it wherever, or to make your decision. And then the decision might not be for like 2 or 3 months anyway. So it's a matter of just being honest with the hotel. So at least then if you've asked them to hold the space, they know, well, the decision's going to be made in 2 months, so I know I can hold it and I can keep holding it. When none of that information is there, you're just another inquiry, and they don't know how serious you are. They don't know what your timeline is. So then they start chasing you for answers, and you're like, well, I wasn't ready for that, but they don't know that. So again, just adding that on there. So this is the table that I have as a template that I then send to the hotel. So I have that brief, which was that slide before, and then I have the actual table I'm asking them to fill in. So you will see on all of this, name of the meeting. So I want them to name that meeting space. I want to be able to go online. I want to be able to see what that looks like. I also ask for pictures to be sent of the meeting room as well. Yes, sometimes they send you 360 tours, but you can be faffing about with those. So I do ask for an actual JPEG, or if I haven't found it on their 360 tour straight away, then I'm like, sorry, can you just send me a picture of the room? Because that's going to be a good quality picture that's hopefully going to show the natural daylight in the room if that's what's important as well. So I've obviously run through a lot of that in the previous slide, but this is where they have to complete all that. What is the max capacities for these? What's your rack rate? I did this before and someone said, what's rack rate? Rack rate is the most rate that they can quote for. So you'll have different rates throughout the year for conferences. The rack rate is the maximum that they will charge. So I put on their offered rate. I'm not going to have a client paying a rack rate. My clients will pay a discounted rate and they'll have a percentage off, because most hotels, unless they are like 90% full, that's the only time they're going to insist on you paying their maximum rate. Their published rate, you used to call it a published rate. Well, this is what we're doing in January, this is what we're doing in February, oh, but I've got a client that wants to come, what can you offer? So again, having that on, again, it makes you look like you know what you're doing as well. And that's a good way to show other people internally your savings between the rack rate and the offered rate as well. So then I put, please send the full 24-hour inclusions. Some of them will then put that list. So that list I had a minute ago that's like, this includes the accommodation, this includes the dinner. That's where all that information will be sent. Some of them will have it on a separate PDF, but I'm asking for it so that I can make sure I've got like for like with my quotes. Minimum numbers for contracting. This is your friend here, this sentence, so that they can put in minimum numbers. Say this is for, you're like, oh, it can be between 40 and 60. So say they're like, well, minimum's going to be 40 people then. So you're like, great. Whereas some will go, well, we need a minimum of 50 for the size of this room. So there's different reasons that they need to quote for different sizes as well. And again, where will tea and coffee breaks be? So with this particular client, as you can see, this cannot be in the meeting room. They want to go out and stretch their legs and things. Most have foyers. You can't assume there's going to be space directly outside of the meeting room. So again, if that is important, I do ask that. And again, with this particular client, can lunch be in the restaurant, or please suitable seated alternative, not in the meeting room? So they didn't want to be in the meeting room, some do, and that's easy for everybody. But here it's like, actually, because what will happen is a hotel will go, that's great, yeah, you can have it in the foyer, but they're like standing up and networking, and some clients, that's what they want to do. But this particular client, they like to sit down, actually have it in the restaurant, a couple of long tables, and yeah, it's quite self-explanatory. And are your rates inclusive or exclusive of VAT? Because that is your 20% difference when hotels are quoting, and that's when you can really get your rate comparison there. This is just a quick example. I'll just gloss over this one very quickly. I have one client, and they have particular requirements, things like what's the network like for phones, because they're fed up with going to hotels all the time, and they don't have a very good network. So they're not actually able to communicate with people even though they're all there at the same time. Or they're having to make calls during that meeting to their offices or other people who are working from home. And if the network is pretty dire, then that's not going to work for them. So that's where I go, perhaps over and above, I guess you would say, for each of my clients, right, what's most important to you? What are your priorities here? Even with not essential stuff, do you have any additional activities, i.e. karaoke, table tennis? It's amazing how many hotels do have these things. And that's just like an hour that particular client can do that internally. Might not even be a charge for it either. So that's lovely. This is where, as I say, I asked, please provide picture of meeting space and here. So I'm very clear what I'm asking for. I know it's a lot of information, but spending that time, that first time, writing that brief at the top of the email and the table underneath saves so much time, and the one thing we're all trying to do is be more efficient, not waste as many people's time, not going backwards and forwards, because then you have this long train of emails, which hopefully could be done in one email. The venues that reply with my one email are my favorite, obviously, and they're the ones that I then feed back to the client and go, they were brilliant. They gave me all the information within 4 hours, 8 hours a day or whatever, by the timeline, by the deadline, whatever that was. So then very quickly, because we're at 12:30, do just take a snapshot of this one, because this is all the other considerations that you may now need to take. So I won't go through them individually, and I've put in brackets because I knew there was going to be a lot of information on this one, why I've put those as examples there. So did everyone get that? Sorry, should I go back? You got it? And there are so many different seminars you could go on with things like Martin's Law, Natasha's Law. So with the dietary requirements, there's 14 dietary requirements every hotel and venue should be catering for, and they should have all their food labelled, and it should be very clear. There's a long way to go still with a lot of venues, but there we go. So, any questions and where to find more information? Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, hang on, let me get the mic. It's going to the back and then I'll come back. And if anybody does need to go, because it is 12:30. Sorry. I'm not sending the slides, but I think it is. I think it's being recorded. I'm not sure. So perhaps the CHS show. Or if you email me afterwards, and if you want to have a chat about anything, just let me know. Yeah.
It's just about cabaret, because I know quite a few venues I've been, they've had cabarets dining room style.
Yes.
Is it normal for the industry to obviously say it's cabaret, meaning dining room style, and is it something you then need to make sure you clarify with every hotel?
Yeah, the hotel should be, if they're saying cabaret, it should be with that gap on every table so that nobody has to turn their chair around. So perhaps ask them for pictures where they've got cabaret style and they've done it beforehand, so just that then they are clear. And even say it in an email, I'm just checking nobody has got their back to a screen, and just check it that way. Because, and obviously site visits, I haven't gone into site visits or anything like that, but that's obviously a good way, but not everyone has time to do that. But that's why I always ask for a picture, and especially if they can send a picture of the layout that you've actually asked for. So at least then, as you say, you can just double check that cabaret is cabaret. Yeah, do take a business card, anybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.